There is a story I wrote in 1877 that most people have never read, and I believe it contains one of the most important truths I ever put into words. It is the story of a man who called himself ridiculous, not as self-pity, but as a statement of fact about how the world saw him and eventually how he came to see himself. He had reached the point where nothing in life seemed to matter anymore, where every conversation felt hollow and every human concern felt pointless, where the distance between himself and every other living person had grown so vast that he had stopped feeling it as loneliness and started experiencing it simply as the natural condition of existence. He had decided to end his life calmly and without drama, having concluded through a long and careful process of reasoning that nothing was worth anything, that no connection was real, that no meaning was available to him, and that the most honest response to this conclusion was simply to act on it. What is important to understand about him is that he was not in an acute emotional crisis when he made this decision. He was calm, he was clear, he had simply reasoned his way to the edge and was prepared to step off it. And then on the night he had chosen, something happened that changed the entire direction of his life. And it was not a grand event, and it was not a revelation delivered from the sky, and it was not the kind of dramatic intervention that stories usually require to justify a transformation. A little girl grabbed his arm in the rain, desperate and frightened, looking for help he did not give her, because he was too far inside his own carefully constructed indifference to respond in the way a person who still cared about things would have responded. He walked away from her, that is all. He simply walked away, and that act of walking away, that choice to remain sealed inside himself when another human being's genuine need was right there in front of him, asking something of him, cracked something open that all his years of philosophical detachment had managed to keep sealed. He fell asleep that night, carrying the weight of that small failure without fully understanding what it meant yet. And he dreamed, and in his dream, he saw a world where human beings lived in complete harmony with each other and with everything around them. A world where love was not a scarce resource to be rationed carefully among the people you had decided deserved it, but the natural atmosphere of existence itself, as available and as necessary and as sustaining as air. And he understood in that dream with a clarity he had never experienced in waking life, that this was not a fantasy constructed by a desperate mind seeking comfort, but a recognition of something that human beings have always known at the deepest level of themselves and have always been moving away from through their choices, through their pride, through their relentless insistence on placing themselves above others and outside the common life of humanity. He watched himself corrupt that perfect world, not through malice or deliberate cruelty, but simply through being himself, through bringing into it the habits of thought and the patterns of relating that he had developed over a lifetime of careful self-protection. And he watched those habits spread through the perfect world the way a single drop of ink spreads through clear water until the clarity is completely gone and cannot be recovered. He woke up transformed, not gradually, not through slow, deliberate work. Instantaneously, the way a light comes on in a dark room, the way a person who has been holding their breath finally exhales. And the truth he carried when he opened his eyes was something he could express only very simply, the way the deepest truths always demand simple expression. The chief thing is to love others as yourself, not as a moral rule to be followed dutifully because it is the right thing to do, not as an aspiration to be pursued when circumstances permit. The fundamental truth about what a human life is actually for and what it requires to feel like something genuinely worth living rather than something to be managed and survived until it ends. Most people will hear this story and feel the truth of it somewhere in themselves in this moment and then return almost immediately to exactly the life they were living before. And I want to be honest with you about why that happens, because I think understanding it clearly is the most useful thing I can offer you today, The gap between understanding something and actually living by it is the largest gap in human experience, and almost nothing bridges it except the kind of direct encounter with truth that my ridiculous man had in his dream, the kind of encounter that does not merely inform the mind but reorganizes the whole person from the inside, that moves through you like heat rather than sitting in you like an idea you are storing for later. The intellectual understanding that love is the chief thing does not change much on its own. People have carried that understanding for centuries while continuing to live in precisely the ways that contradict it, because understanding something clearly with your mind and being genuinely changed by it in the place where your actual daily choices are made are two entirely different experiences, and most people spend their whole lives in the first without ever making the crossing to the second. What my ridiculous man discovered is that the crossing does not happen through more thinking or more reading or more careful analysis of the situation. It happens through genuine contact with another person's reality, through allowing the truth of someone else's inner life to actually reach you rather than processing it from behind the glass of your own preoccupations, through being present enough in a moment to let it land in you rather than deflecting it with the armor of indifference that most people have been building and reinforcing for years without quite realizing that is what they are doing. Every person has moments in their life that carry the potential to be that kind of turning point, moments when the truth about what actually matters is right there available with unusual clarity, when the distance between yourself and another person collapses briefly and their reality becomes as vivid and as present to you as your own. Sometimes these moments come through loss, when someone you loved is no longer there, and you see with sudden devastating clarity all the times the connection was available and you chose something smaller and less demanding instead, all the moments you were physically present but emotionally somewhere else entirely. Sometimes they come through illness, your own or someone close to you, when the ordinary texture of daily life is stripped away, and what remains is just the raw fact of being alive and the question of what you are actually doing with that fact. Sometimes they come through a stranger's face at an unexpected moment, or through a conversation that goes somewhere neither person planned for it to go, or through a piece of writing that says exactly what you have been unable to say to yourself. The form these moments take does not matter. What matters is what you do when they arrive, whether you allow them to change you or whether you absorb the feeling and file it carefully away as an interesting experience and return to the familiar architecture of your previous life, which is what most people do, not because they are bad or careless, but because genuine change is frightening, and the familiar feels safer, even when what is familiar is quietly making you smaller. My ridiculous man did something different. He went back and found the little girl he had failed on that rainy night, and that single small act of returning to do the thing he should have done the first time was the beginning of everything that followed in his life. Not a grand gesture, not a transformation the world would applaud, just a man going back for the person he had walked away from, carrying now the full weight of understanding why it mattered and why it had always mattered and why he had spent so long pretending otherwise. The truth is always closer than you think it is. It is usually right there in the person in front of you, in the moment you are currently inside, in the connection that is available right now, if you are willing to stop insisting that nothing is worth the risk of genuinely feeling it. One moment of truth can change everything. My ridiculous man proved that with his life. The only question that remains is whether you are willing to have yours.